Hey look, it's the Kritzkrieg! For TF2, it's about as perfect of an unlock as you can get. It's got a clear purpose, its stats are simple and straightforward, it's a good, useful side grade to the medigun. Now here's how it's the worst designed weapon in the game. I gotcha, didn't I? But it's true. And here's the part of the video where I'm going to drill into your head that from now on, we will not be talking about the stats of the Kritzkrieg. We'll be talking about the actual design of the weapon itself. Because like I said, the Kritzkrieg is basically a perfect weapon from a stat point of view. In fact, the only changes it ever got since it came out were to increase the charge rate from 10% faster to 25%, and they made the taunt heal you a little bit. Those two changes within like a year of it coming out, and that was it. They kind of knocked it out of the park for the stats. But for the other aspects of the weapon, it kind of falls flat. And I think a weapon's actual design is a very underrated aspect of Team Fortress 2 that almost goes under the radar a bit, in part because it has generally been handled so well. It might not be something that you really automatically notice, but your brain does. And it's this reason that I think the Kritzkrieg in particular has been handled so poorly. Over the years, in my opinion, it has actually come to stick out kind of like a sore thumb. And what exactly do I mean by that? Well, let's demonstrate this by playing a little game called Name That Weapon! What could it be? This time it's going to be a sound-based challenge for all you listeners out there, and we'll start with an easy one. Name this weapon. If you said the Force Nature, you are correct. But can you name both of these? That's right, the revolver and the Diamondback. Now can we go for three? The shotgun, the reserve shooter, and the panic attack. Now what about these sounds? Number 1 is the Brass Beast, and if for number 2 you guessed the forklift from Breaking Bad Season 4 Episode 5, you would be absolutely correct. And for the final round, try these. Yeah, well, I'm sure if I added these two, you'd recognize them. Those last two are obviously the Quick Fix and the Vaccinator. The first two were the Medigun and the Kritzkrieg, which sound identical. And actually I tricked you because I just played the Kritzkrieg twice. This is what the Medigun sounds like. Yeah, it's the same. I imagine if you play TF2 on any kind of semi-regular basis, you're able to pretty easily pick out all those sounds. And even if you're new to the game, you could probably pick out which sounds aren't stock weapons just by hearing them. You think to yourself, oh yeah, I've heard that sound before, but this one sounds different. But as far as I am aware, there are only 3 non-melee weapons that don't have unique firing sounds. The Scottish Resistance, the Blutsauger, and the Kritzkrieg. Of the dozens and dozens of weapons in the game, there are only 3. And while this fact does stick out for each of these weapons, the Blutsauger has a completely unique model, and the Scottish Resistance does look kind of similar to the Sticky Bomb Launcher, but it has its own unique projectile from stock. The Kritzkrieg, in addition to not having its own sounds, is literally just an add-on to the Medigun. It doesn't even have its own model. It shares that trait with the Backburner and the Natasha, which are also just add-ons for the Flamethrower and the Minigun. But of those 3, the Natasha is the least egregious, kind of ironically because it is by far the worst concept stat-wise. While the Natasha is just a slight recoloring of the minigun with this bullet add-on thingy, it does have to produce a constant loud noise before firing. By the time you're in range to be hit by the Natasha, you will always be able to hear it, and it is very distinctly different sounding than the gun it's based off of. But the Backburner is a pretty close contender with the Kritzkrieg in its design flaws. It has a relatively small add-on that can be easily obscured, and it's not even partially recolored like the Natasha is. But at least the Backburner has a unique sound. I do think the actual sounds of the Flamethrower, the Backburner, and the Degreaser can all end up being kinda samey in the heat of battle, but the difference is definitely there. The only thing though is that if you miss the little dragon head thingy and decide to take your chance in running away, that can definitely be a life or death mistake. And since Jungle Inferno redid the flame particles, the flames are a lot more bright and opaque. They're generally just a bit harder to see through, so when looking at a pyro dead on, it can occasionally be difficult to see. So sometimes your best bet is hearing the difference. The sound design of weapons in TF2 is a genuinely underlooked and very important aspect of the game. But of course, with the Kritzkrieg, there is no difference to hear, it's the same sound. And of course that's just a part of it because, yeah, the Kritzkrieg does look a whole lot like stock. The real reason why these are just add-ons to the default weapons is because they were some of the first unlocks put into the game. The standards weren't really laid out yet, especially for Medic because he was the first one to get weapons in general. And when I started playing the game, the Kritzkrieg was the only other medigun, so I didn't really think about it that much. But when the quick fix came out, it basically blew the Kritzkrieg out of the water. Again, not stat-wise of course, because the quick fix was pretty bad when it came out. But not only does the quick fix have its own completely new sound effects, it has a completely unique nozzle, I guess you could call it, and possibly most important of all, it has a different backpack that is distinct and easily identifiable even when the medic isn't actively healing anyone. You can look at a medic on your team or the enemy team from like 50 feet away, and even if he has his melee weapon out, you can still immediately identify that he has the quick fix. And they would continue this trend for the Vaccinator later on too. And while the Vaccinator's backpack is tiny, and you might not always see it from the front, the fact that it's so small also makes it easily recognizable. If you don't see the tiny backpack, you still know it's the Vaccinator because you don't see any other backpack. And when the Vaccinator is actually healing, it is always recognizable because of the resistance icon. For any problems the Vaccinator might have, this isn't one of them. But on the other hand, can you identify which of these medics has the Kritzkrieg and which has the Medigun? The Kritzkrieg add-on is so small and can be easily obscured, and isn't even visible from behind, which is another reason why the design of the backpack of a Medigun is arguably, if not more important than the design of the gun itself. If they all had unique backpacks, it would always be clear which Medigun the medic had, even if he didn't actively have it out. And this isn't one of those situations where it's only one hyper-specific angle. Like I said, you can't tell at all from behind, even if the Medigun is actually out. And even from the front, it can be hard to see. And remember that medic is often standing behind people. There's a good chance that whoever he's healing is blocking out your view. And part of the reason why this is important is because the classes in TF2 were designed explicitly to draw your attention to their weapons. A lot of them have large hands and darker gradients on their legs to draw your attention upward. Your eyes will immediately be brought to this area of the torso and the arms, and that should tell you everything you need to know about the character you're looking at. Their team color, their weapons, well, mostly just those two things, but those are the most important things. And I guess the gunboats and the man-treads and the wee booties are all exceptions because they're on the feet, but whatever, you'll figure that out. But it's this design principle that's the reason why Blue Scout having brown pants has never caused any recognition issues. Now let me just clarify that I am a fan of blue pants on Blue Scout. I think it looks better and it keeps things uniform with the rest of the classes, and I think they reverted it for the lamest possible reason, but Scout having brown pants for both teams was never a problem for that reason. Ostensibly, about half of Scout's blue model is the red team's color. Aside from on Scout, these brown pants are associated with the red team. On classes with a similar palette to Scout, like Soldier, Heavy, and Sniper, they all have their brown pants swapped to blue for blue team. But by design, that's not where your eye is drawn. It's not drawn to their legs, it's drawn to their arms and their torso. And it was only really confirmed to have been a bug that Scout had the wrong color pants a few months ago when it was fixed for a day. As far as we knew before that, it was just an odd choice for them to have brown pants for both teams. If this bug only started existing today, a bunch of people on Reddit would probably start claiming they couldn't tell these two apart. I have unironically had multiple people tell me that something like the Sergeant's drill hat causes team recognition issues because it replaces Soldier's team-colored helmet with a neutral-colored green hat. I think that's kind of because a lot of people don't really understand certain aspects of the way classes were designed. And sometimes I feel like the general understanding of it has only gotten worse over time. Like, of course there are some cosmetics that have a negative impact on readability, but we've had a weapon that is definitely not nearly as distinctly visible as it should be since 2008. And unlike a hat, or pants, or shoes, the Kritzkrieg is a weapon that is in the area that your eye is specifically supposed to be drawn to. But even then, it doesn't really stick out. At least not as much as it should. And I think the Kritzkrieg really just gets away with this because it is so old. It's just probably not something that people actively think about, despite it probably appearing in a large percentage of the matches you play. But like I said earlier, it really started sticking out to me when the quick fix was added, and really showed how things should be done. Keep in mind that Medic is arguably the most important class in the game, making mediguns arguably the most important weapon. So it is pretty important to be able to tell them apart. Even after they've added festive weapons and war paints and Australiums and whatever, the Kritzkrieg and the Backburner are probably the only two weapons that I have ever mistaken for something else. Not a lot, but it does happen. It even happened to someone else while I was actively recording footage for this video. If you're in a situation where you're frequently swapping between stock and the Kritzkrieg between lives, it can be easy for the person you're healing, or for enemies, to make that mistake in the heat of battle. Yeah, it does tell you the name of the medigun when you're being healed, but that's easy to overlook, and if the medigun is renamed, that doesn't really help you. And either way, enemies don't get that notification, and sometimes the medigun just doesn't feel like showing up. But realistically, you shouldn't have to wait until the opponent is actively Ubered to see which one it is. Especially when medics often try to stay out of the line of fire, you should ideally be able to tell what that medic is using just by getting a glimpse of them. And with the quick fix and the vaccinator, you usually do. And look, I'm not going to be disingenuous and say I mixed the Kritzkrieg and the medigun up a lot, or some kind of major problem. The light on the side of the gun can be noticed, and you can use context clues to figure it out even if you can't see the whole thing. It is far from the biggest problem in the game, but it's a problem that exists. And it's an issue that sticks out to me, not only because of how important mediguns are to the game, but that the mediguns that came out after it completely lack this problem. And also because fixing it is, hypothetically, pretty easy. Just give it its own unique model and its own unique sounds. Also give these unique sounds while you're at it. I mean, you could even just pitch up or pitch down default sounds if you want to be lazy, and I think they do sound pretty good and are distinct enough. And yeah, blah blah blah, Valve isn't going to change it, especially at this point. Yeah, sure, I get it. But can you imagine how cool it would be if they held a contest to redesign these weapons? You know, keep some old aspects like the Backburner's dragon head thing or the Kritzkrieg's side light, but make them more unique. They used to do art contests and hat describing contests, and in a fantasy world where they still did stuff like this, that's what I would want to see happen. Make it like a mini event to have these old weapons get facelifts. Or they could even just pick some models that are already on the workshop. I guess because these weapons are so old, they've kind of become iconic looking in their own way. But honestly, to me, I think only the Backburner really offers anything interesting. I think the dragon head thing in the Backburner is cool, but the add-ons for the Kritzkrieg and the Natasha are honestly pretty boring. But hey, at this point, I would even take the Backburner and the Kritzkrieg just being partially recolored like the Natasha is. I mean, even that would be better than nothing. And a part of what had me thinking about this specifically is that Team Fortress 2 Classic fixes basically every problem I have with the Kritzkrieg. Now, TF2 Classic kinda lost me a little bit when they started adding a whole bunch of things that really don't feel like classic TF2, but they made a good Kritzkrieg. The nozzle is more distinct, it has a brand new backpack, it's got distinct sounds, and it even has a completely new, if not a little bit gaudy, Medibeam. I mean, imagine if the hold on. I'm getting a fake message from my not-real producer that the Kritzkrieg already has a custom Medibeam in regular TF2. Yeah, you see those little tiny particles? How could you miss it? Except, you know, the quick fix and the vaccinator also use that same Medibeam for some reason. So, technically, the default Medigun is the only one that has a unique beam. Kinda. But, yeah, the main point I'm getting at is that the models, the designs, and the sounds that weapons have has always been a very important aspect of the game, and that some just don't hold up. I mean, let's be real, the Kritzkrieg hasn't held up since June 2011 when the quick fix was added, and the Backburner even further back in September 2010 when the degreaser was added. Once they started putting weapons in these slots that were completely unique, it did make the add-on ones just feel incomplete. But the majority of weapons are very distinct from one another. Think about it, even weapons that look similar-ish from a distance, like the flare gun and the detonator, are still easily distinguished from the noise and the projectiles. Or there are even tiny weapons like the pistol and the winger, which have the same basic shape, and can even share some war paints, which is kinda questionable, but they do have unique sounds and unique rolls. While they can look too similar when they're painted, by the time you actually hear a shot, you'll know the difference. If you want to think about it this way, this video is just as much me praising the visual and sound design of weapons in TF2 in general, as it is me calling out one specific one that falls short. But that doesn't make for as good of a title. And again, I do feel it is a genuinely underappreciated aspect of the game that I don't really see get discussed all that much. It can be fairly subtle, but it is definitely noticeable in the back of your mind. The differences between the Medigun and the Kritzkrieg are also subtle, but I think this is an instance where you really want the differences to be clear and in your face, given how important the weapon is. And yes, of course I like the Kritzkrieg. I've already described it as a perfect unlock from a stat perspective. I just wish it looked and sounded different. That would really make it perfect. And that's all. Maybe it'll happen someday. I won't hold my breath, but stranger things have happened. Like when they fixed Scout's pants after 17 years and then they undid it after a day. Why would they do that? If they're gonna keep it brown, at least just fix his pant loops being blue. Why are they blue? You can't unsee that. Well, that's it. Thanks for watching. And a special thanks to my patrons like Varric, Captain Forex, Eggonx, Colonel, Probably Vinegar, Caponicus, Kelso the Pirate, Pillsman's Fox, Some Crazy Idiot, Ozon, Evil Toaster, Salt God, Lavi, Taupe, Time Consuming, Man344, Nolan46, and Melodici.